Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us today in the third of our series regarding the revised Chesapeake Bay Watershed Agreement. Today's is Clean Water for a Healthy Bay. It is the second of the four proposed goals of the new watershed agreement, and we are going to get started. First of all, I would like to welcome Keith Bolt at the Chesapeake Bay Program Office. Keith is currently serving in the role of coordinator of our toxics contaminant work group. And he works also on strategic planning and water resource policy issues. And he's been at the Bay program since 2022. Next, we have Jeremy Hansen, who is the coordinator of the Water Quality Goal Implementation Team. And Jeremy has been also at the Bay program, I would say now, because I just lost your bioinformation longer than me, so about 11 years, 12 years? Yes. Yes, and he is with the Chesapeake Research Consortium. And finally, we have Breck Sullivan, who is the coordinator of our science and technical assessment and reporting team, otherwise known as STAR, which is obviously the much easier acronym to remember. And STAR is Breck is with the U.S. Geological Survey, and she has been at the Bay program approximately 8 years now, I believe, 7 years now. 6 years now, where she started out as a staffer for this 4-star, and she's now moved into the coordinator position. So I will get all those statistics right and going forward. So I am going to turn this over to Keith, who will start off with talking about our toxic contaminants mitigation outcome. And Keith, I will let you take it away.
Sounds good. Thanks, Rachel. Thanks for the introduction. And thanks everyone for your interest today. I heard we have over 80 people on the call. We left church a couple minutes ago. So appreciate everyone's interest in tuning in during this public feedback period. So yeah, as Rachel said, I'm the coordinator of the toxics work group and giving a little bit of an update on kind of what's in the outcome, what's in the draft revised agreement under the toxic contaminants topic, and kind of how we got there, what we learned, and kind of how that informed what's being proposed. So move on to the next slide. So I believe this slide just kind of says what the current language is, and so this is an important distinction. So currently there are two outcomes supported by the toxic contaminants work group. You can see there's an outcome focusing on research and focuses on increasing the understanding, developing a research agenda, other keywords, right? Identifying what management practices would sort of be worth pursuing. So it's again kind of there's kind of a little bit of an implication towards novel research here, right? And then the second outcome that's supported by the toxic contaminants work group is this policy prevention outcome. So we're talking about improving practices and controls, building on existing programs, again, using that research outcome to make decisions, but really kind of the focus here is that the work group would sort of be coordinating and overseeing some of the work that our partners are doing in the watershed and overseeing their programs. That's kind of where the current language is. So move on to the next slide. So this is kind of a busy slide, but just kind of wanted to let everyone visualize kind of what the process was to revise. And I'll share, I've been in the Bay program for 3 years, but became work group coordinator of this work group in March of this year, right? So I was not involved directly through that toxic contaminants lens through all of this process. So you can see, right, there was this reaching 2025 process we went through, this beyond 2025 phase 1 process, both resulted in reports, one resulted in an executive council charge, and then we've kind of been walking through the last few months, going from the work group level to the management board, getting feedback, going back to the work group, back to the management board, doing some wordsmithing, and then kind of getting a place where our decision makers in the management board and the principal staff committee, which are two levels of management bodies in the Bay program, we're comfortable with releasing this draft for public feedback. And I can definitely answer questions on this process, but this is just kind of a quick overview on that. Yep. So what did we learn from that process? So what we heard, in particular from the management board, and I kind of think back on a late March office hours after the work group presented a proposal to update and keep both outcomes. Was this kind of this problem, there's just been this focus on this idea of SMART, specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound outcomes, and to the extent possible, trying to kind of pull some of those elements and put them into the language that's in the revised agreement. And what we heard from the management board and what we analyzed ourselves, right, is that the current language doesn't really have any of those elements, right? It's we don't see numbers, but it's not just that we don't see numbers. It's this idea that this focus on the work group itself overseeing the programs that the partners are doing isn't really achievable or relevant given current capacity, right? For example, I was in a Superfund program before I came to the Bay program, and there's the Superfund division director, for example, is not going to the toxic contaminants work group meetings. But there's just one example, right? And so there's really what we heard is, we want to kind of update, we want to consolidate, we want to create this community of practice to streamline, to focus on added value through partnership, right? And we want to focus on being achievable and relevant. We thought it maybe didn't make sense for this consolidated outcome to have a target on, for example, the amount of contaminants to reduce, right? If the work group itself is convening, but it's not actually moving dirt, it's not actually reducing contaminants, we don't want to have specific targets in language. And then lastly, I'll say here, right? You can see in the next slide, we'll have the outcome language, but the focus is on boosting partners' capacity to do their jobs better and to mitigate risk to human health and the environment. That's where the name change comes from. And yeah, so last slide, and this is what you'll all see in the revised watershed agreement if you take a look. And I will just read it, right? So it's one outcome, it's combined, and we're calling it the toxic contaminants mitigation outcome, still under the toxic contaminants work group. It's to reduce the amount and effect of toxic contaminants such as PCBs, plastics, mercury, and PFAS on the water, lands, living resources, and communities, the Chesapeake Bay watershed by facilitating an increased understanding of their impacts and mitigation options. And then the target under it, right, is promoting continuous information sharing between researchers, program managers, and policymakers on the lessons learned, best practices, and most up-to-date science, policy, and communications around the toxic contaminants impacting the Chesapeake Bay watershed. And that's what I have for you all today. So happy to answer some questions, and thanks everyone for tuning in. Thank you.
Okay, thanks so much, Keith. We'll just pause for a second. I don't have any questions currently. If you do have any questions for Keith about the new toxics mitigation outcome, please feel free to put them in the Q&A box now. Otherwise, you can continue to put them in there, and we will answer anything that comes in as well at the end of today's presentation. So we'll just wait another like 30 seconds, and then we will move on to Jeremy. Okay, we do have one for you.
Are there any monitoring results for toxics?
Yes, I'll just repeat that. Are there any monitoring
Okay.
results for toxics?
So by monitoring, let me follow up. What do you mean by monitoring results?
Carol, I can unmute you if you give me a second. If you want to ask this question, that might be a little bit easier. So just pardon one moment. We have a lot of people on, so I'm just scanning to find you.
That's fine.
Here we go.
Okay.
All right. Go ahead, Carol. You should be able to chat.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, loud and clear.
Fantastic. So I'm just curious, surely there is some level of some measure out from testing of PCBs, plastics, mercury, PFAS, and granted, it's probably going to be in different places around the state. And I don't disagree that capacity is really the way to go. But I know some of the other outcomes have like smaller goals, like, reduce by 5% or that sort of thing. And I'm just curious if there is a database somewhere of, which areas are really impacted by PCBs or by plastics and mercury, et cetera.
Sure. So outside of the big program, and this is not going to be a complete answer, but outside the program, for example, there's the Clean Water Act 303D impaired waters list. So certainly a lot of, and that's just one program. Is the Superfund National Priorities list, kind of list of Superfund sites. So there's plenty of resources outside of the Bay program where different federal and state partners track the location of contaminant hotspots.
And does your work group monitor those?
So the current indicator for the work group is based on, I believe, the Clean Water Act Section 303D list. I believe it's going to be updated because we don't have Section 303D people coming to the work group meetings, and so we want to focus in on an indicator that kind of reflects what the work group will be focused on moving forward. But that is kind of what the current indicator is for the outcome. And also I'll say, folks are interested in these types of programs and kind of where the hotspots are outside. There's with federal and state partners that have these resources, and I would encourage you to go, look up more about the Superfund program, look up more about the Rio 3D program, et cetera.
And Keith, actually, Emily Major just sent a response. I unmuted her. She wanted to join in.
Thanks, Rachel. I just wanted to add that in the past, the TCW has summarized or synthesized the 303D impairments across the watershed for PCBs and mercury, as well as some other priority organics. So that was summarized and is on Chesapeake Progress. I dropped the link to the indicator in the chat. And then there was a story map made and updated annually or biannually when the 303D updates were done specifically for PCBs and non-tidal and tidal waters. So while the work group wasn't, as Keith said, involved in the actual implementation of that, we were synthesizing information related to those things as you noted. So I just wanted to add that.
Thanks, Emily.
Great. Thank you so much, Emily. Great. We had a few more questions come in the chat. We're going to take one more now, and then we will address the other ones in the end. So Keith, last one I'll say now is, I understand the reason not to have a target goal number, but should the outcome have a starting place so we know what reduce is being measured from?
A starting place of kind of what the contaminant levels are.
Correct.
At a watershed scale. Sure, right. And so this is I think a healthy public policy debate to have. I think kind of the comfortability of the management board right now is a convener of practitioners. And I think kind of the argument is, right, if the work group is not going to be overseeing moving dirt, right, et cetera, maybe we shouldn't set ourselves a goal that implies that we can. I think that's the vision of the management board. I don't want to speak for them, but that's my understanding and having common conversations with members.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Keith. So we are going to move on for now, but like I said, we're going to come back to these other questions. So I'd like to turn it over now to Jeremy Hansen to talk about the new proposed reducing excess nitrogen, phosphorus, and sediment outcome. Jeremy.
All right. Thank you, Rachel, and thanks to everyone joining us here today or watching this recording after the fact. As Rachel said, my name is Jeremy Hansen. I'm coordinator for the Water Quality Goal Implementation Team, and I've been around the Bay program since 2012. So I have the joy to discuss the outcome associated with the efforts to reduce the excess nitrogen, phosphorus, and sediment loads to our streams, rivers, and the Bay. This was formerly known as the WIP outcome. So throughout my slides, I'm going to use the royal we a lot during this, but please understand, I'm just a humble messenger today. The partnership has the final say on the language in the revised agreement. I'm representing what I've heard as part of the team, and as someone here at the Bay program, I'm not a decider. nor am I a spokesperson for any specific partners or agencies. And I'm not a lawyer and I'm not a modeler. So with that said, now looking at the old agreement language, back in 2014, for that agreement, we established two outcomes that were associated with the implementation of practices to meet the Chesapeake Bay Total Maximum Daily Load, or TMDL. Some of you may call it the Bay Diet. So as the outcomes in 2014 reflected those commitments by partners under the TMDL, the 2017 outcome therefore was to implement 60% of the practices by that year needed to reduce nitrogen, phosphorus, and sediment levels necessary to achieve water quality, and have all practices implemented by 2025. So by the end of 2017, we got to the 60% mark for phosphorus and sediment. We didn't get there for nitrogen. As part of that midpoint assessment effort, we switched to a new suite of modeling tools, and the partnership also agreed to updated planning targets in 2018 for nitrogen and sediment by 2025. So the states developed new watershed implementation plans, or WIPs. Those are still active right now. They're still working to achieve those planning targets, continue that work today. So we assess our progress for this outcome using what we call a progress year. I just want to mention this because it matters, from July 1st through June 30th. So when we say it's sort of like a state fiscal year. So when we say 2025 or by 2025, what we mean is the cumulative implementation of practices from July 1st, 2024 through June 30th, 2025. So the 2025 progress year just ended, and we'll know where we ended up in like months from now, once all the data has been submitted, fully reviewed. That process takes some time and is ramping up right now. So the latest year we have full data for 2024. So as of June 30th, 2024, all the implementation through that date so far gets us 59% of the way there for nitrogen, 92% of the way there for phosphorus. We've already surpassed our sediment load reductions and continue to reduce them from our 2009 levels. So overall, we're off course for nitrogen, close but off course for phosphorus, and we're there for sediment according to our model estimates using the current model. So that's the context of where we are from the previous outcomes in the watershed agreement. So coming out of all the conversations leading up to our outcome revisions in this Beyond 2025 process, we didn't start from scratch. We had already had a sense of some of the needs and wants for this outcome. That is mentioned, we knew the timeline is past. We need something new. We also knew that there are some things that remain vital to our partners. Accountability, for one, the recognition that they continue to be committed to implementation, that they're not letting their foot off the gas, as it were. So moving on from that sense of needs and wants, our approach to other groups has been pretty similar, I think, because given the time frame we had. We worked very hard to add new opportunities for input and using offline polls, existing meetings to gather a range of feedback. We've included a few meeting dates and links for reference because there's some materials and documents available for anyone that wants to go deeper. Today, I'm giving extremely high level, summarized overview. So with that, our searching, as we were receiving feedback, having these conversations, it felt like a balancing act. And we heard a lot of similar thoughts or ideas, but we also heard a lot of comments or thoughts and ideas that diverged or conflicted with each other. So for example, looking back at our old outcome language, some people felt that was fairly wonky and not accessible to a general public audience, while others want us to remain fairly precise and accurate in our language, even if it means being a little wonky. So we also heard that labeling the outcomes as we did as the watershed implementation or WIP outcomes was maybe not the most accurate label. After all, it's not the WIPs or the plans themselves that are the desired outcomes. It's implementing the practices to achieve the water quality standards. So we also had a lot of discussion about the timeline of the new outcome. And we knew from the start that we needed a new timeline, but back as we were having these conversations leading up to revising the outcome, for a lot of that time, we were still absorbing a lot of the recommendations coming out of the scientific and technical advisory committee's comprehensive evaluation on system response, or CESA report. We also were and remain in the midst of a major update to our modeling tools. So we did hear a lot of voices calling for us to set a schedule or deadline now in the new outcome. And I realized I haven't been saying next slide. Have you been keeping up? All right. Sorry. We also heard from many of our partners that they did not want to put a date in writing without our newest modeling tools in place so that we could follow the science and continue pursuing recommendations from the CSER report. So between those efforts, the ongoing model development, all the work that would be involved, we know we would need a fair amount of time to deliberate, hold the conversations to set a scientifically informed timeline. Next slide. Thanks. All right, so hearing all of that now, again, very, very simplified overview of feedback and the balancing act we tried to accomplish. I glossed over quite a bit. The end result was essentially we got the sense of a potential path to address at least partially all the different thoughts or desires from our many partners. So looking at this path, I won't dwell on this too much, but just first and foremost, partners are committed to existing targets and continuing to implement. They're not letting their foot off the gas, trying to be precise, but maybe less wonky at the outcome and so forth. So moving on to the next slide briefly, this is the end result, what we felt met that path. So this is what we put into the text of the July 1st draft agreement for public feedback. So I have this here for reference, but I'll instead go to the next slide, just so there's less text there. That's a little easier to look at. And this at least captures the intent of what we're going for. So again, what we heard over many months in conversations, we're trying to balance many different desires and wishes or thoughts. So at the outcome level, we try to be precise about what the outcome pertains to, changing the name and focusing on, again, the implementation of practices to reduce the excess nitrogen, phosphorus, and sediment is what we're focused on with this outcome, but ultimately to reduce those loads, to support living resources, protect human health, and meet those water quality standards, all of those things. Just being very explicit about it now. We try to avoid the use of nutrients, for example, because that can maybe be a little less clear to folks. Nutrients are good, right? But we also recognize there's probably other improvements we can make to the language. But for the public feedback version, we tried to be very precise and maybe simplify as we go. The message we heard above all from our partners that they're not taking their foot off the gas. They're continuing to implement and innovate. So we put that right up front, right under the outcome as our first target. And the next one, dealing with the issue of timeline, we know that's a big focus and area of concern for folks. So while we are not setting an overall timeline for achieving the outcome right now, we are setting an accountable timeline for ourselves to revise this outcome with those associated targets in the agreement in the future. So we have a good sense of the many steps involved to get to that point where we'll have all the science, the new modeling tools, and everything else by December 2030 gives us the space we need, we think. That all being said, leaders at the top of the partnership can always pick a date or a year. We can always use our current modeling tools and make estimates now based on our current trajectories and progress. But so far, my sense, based on the conversations I've had, is that there is a strong preference for waiting until we have the new information and new modeling tools in place to act upon it and inform that. So again, my sense that path feels less arbitrary than picking a number, and that this approach provides us the space to follow the latest science before we set those expectations in writing. But again, only representing myself and what I understand the process and desires to be. So we are also trying to honor our partners' desire to broaden their sense of progress, to demonstrate through multiple lines of evidence how well we are not making progress out in the watershed and then in the bay. So we have a wealth of monitoring information, for example, and existing indicators and tools that we can continue to build on. And I'm excited to see what else we can reveal using our current models, our future models, and our monitoring data sets going forward. So we look forward to public feedback to help strengthen this outcome and our targets in the revised agreement. And thank you. I'll do my best to respond to questions. And thank you, Rachel and Breck, for figuring out my slides.
Thank you, Breck. So yeah, please, we can take some questions now. We have a few that have actually come in. So I will start with an easy one for you, Jeremy. Can you just please share again how much reduction has been completed to date for nitrogen and phosphorus?
So it was 59% as of 2024 for nitrogen, or 59% of the way to the targets, and then 92% for phosphorus.
Thank you. Will there be areas of feedback in advance of the 2030 commitment update?
Sorry, repeat that.
Will there be areas for feedback in advance of the 2030 commitment update?
Yes, certainly. I think the steps involved, like getting the new models in place, that involves review and feedback by the partnership as well as our scientific and technical advisory committee. There's then the conversations we need to have of, following the CESAR report, are we going to do tiered implementations, set tiered implementation targets? These are all conversations that will happen at the partnership. So the water quality goal implementation team, whatever form our bodies and committees take after restructuring, we'll have those conversations, and those are always open to the public. So there's no shortage of opportunities for continued impact or continued feedback from partners, as well as the signatories and everyone else involved. So that's even before we get to the point where we can propose new outcome language, right?
Right. Although the presentation says partners remain committed to existing targets, I'm not clear what water quality goals will be used for jurisdictions between 2025 and 2030. Will they still use the TMDL 2025 goals for phosphorus and nitrogen? If so, why not include it in the final revised agreement? In the past, we have continued existing goals even while waiting on new model results. Also, what does demonstrating progress through multiple lines of evidence mean?
All right, so for that last I'll start with that last question. All right, we're open to that, open to seeing what that means. I think together, I think that dovetails quite explicitly with the next set of the next outcome, and we're talking about water quality monitoring. So TBD, to be determined on that. I think the intent there is that we're trying to rely more on all our existing data set or existing indicators. For example, our most recent indicator added is this sort of mix of combination of monitoring and modeling, the TMDL indicator, we call it. There's also a tool associated with that looks at a more finer scale at a non-tidal network, looking at, I forget the exact acronym, but the metric tool. We have all this data, we have all this information to look at the progress we're making and actually seeing out on the landscape now in the watershed, to complement the modeling information we have and the progress runs and the information we've traditionally relied on more heavily. So I think multiple lines of evidence is purposefully vague to remain open to evolution as we go. And I think as far as what the goals, the targets, whatever you want to call them, between now and 2030, the partnership's already committed to those existing targets. We already have the phase 3 WEPs. I think what we're trying to do here is make that a little more explicit, because we have set and we've already made decisions as a partnership that, for example, for the next milestone period, we already have targets laid out. And I don't want to get in, I don't want to parse that too much, because we've had to do some updates and revisions to like the exact titles that we refer to as planning targets, and like we have initial planning targets, interim targets, and it gets a little convoluted, which is part of the reason why we avoid that level of specificity in the targets and the outcome, because it very quickly gets complicated, especially for a general audience. So we as a partnership are still committed to those overall reductions, accounting for various things the partnership has agreed we need to account for or haven't been accounted for. Hope that helps.
Thank you, Jeremy. I'm going to give you just one more question and then we're going to hold the rest for afterwards. Is the reference to multiple tools the plain language way to say multiple lines of evidence that is recommended by the Caesar report in order to track accountability beyond using the model?
Sorry, who was that from?
Kristen Saunders.
Huh. Let's try to find it.
I'll read it again.
Yes, I want to say yes. Yeah, I think the answer is yes. We're trying to follow Caesar's recommendations with that and just make connections to the other outcome for water quality monitoring, for example, and just not necessarily developing or trying to get new information, but just better leverage what we already have and put it to use a little more effectively.
Thank you so much, Jerry. We will come back and we will turn it over now to our final speaker, Breck Sullivan, to talk about the new proposed water quality standards, attainment, and monitoring outcome.
Thank you all. Yes, so I'm with the Scientific Technical Assessment and Reporting Team, or STAR, and we help coordinate with the modeling and monitoring that goes on in the Chesapeake Bay. So that is why STAR and its work groups are so heavily involved in this outcome. But I do want to note that we realize the work of the reduction in nitrogen and phosphorus and sediment outcome is very important for us ultimately achieving water quality standards. So we do make sure to align our work with the water quality get and that outcome. So for the water quality standards attainment and monitoring outcome, the current language is to continually improve the capacity to monitor and assess the effects of management actions being undertaken to implement the Bay TMDL and improve water quality. So then use the monitoring results to report annually to the public on progress made in attaining established Bay water quality standards and trends in reducing nutrients and sediment in the watershed. Next slide. So reading this outcome, you'll see that we really have two main parts. The first one is to improve capacity to monitor, and then to use those results to annually report on the trends that we're seeing. So reading this language, it's very action-based and product-based, and not so much more for the change in the ecosystem that we want to see. So next slide. When working with this outcome and trying to assess progress, it's been a little difficult because it has been more based on those actions and the products produced and not that ecosystem change. So it's with it not being quantitative or smart, it has been hard to assess progress. Also, when reading it, it speaks to more just reporting on water quality standards attainment and not actually addressing attaining those standards as the ultimate endpoint. Next slide, please. So with that in mind, we reached out to our partners and work group members, and I see some of you on the line today. So again, thank you for all of the feedback you've already provided to get us where we are now. And that feedback that we heard from them when revising this outcome is that we want to make sure that we continue to emphasize the importance of monitoring capacity. We also heard to focus on attainment of water quality standards, again, making that part of the endpoint that we're trying to reach, while including insights from other tidal and non-tidal data. We also heard feedback that we should consolidate with the previous WIP outcome, again, because our work aligns very closely. And then we also heard from partners that we should broaden our outcome to cover other water quality stressors besides the total maximum daily load parameters of nitrogen, phosphorus, and sediments. Next slide, please. So we provided all of that feedback to the management board to get guidance on how we should move forward with the revised language. And the management board said that they agreed that we should focus on attainment of water quality standards and that we should still account for non-tidal and tidal data within this outcome. They did recommend that we do not combine with the WIP outcome. They saw that it was important to keep those separate, but still making sure that with these outcomes, we work together, we show those interconnectedness and align our work when implementing both outcomes. They also asked us to not broaden our outcome too much past the total maximum daily load parameters, except for potentially looking into parameters that we already have monitoring data for and we already have assessment methods established. They also chose not to adapt SMART targets for what we included in our non-tidal and tidal water quality patterns. So throughout this entire Beyond 2025 process, there was this focus on making sure that we had SMART targets to our outcomes, but they decided that it would not be appropriate to have SMART SMART targets specifically for non-tidal and tidal water quality patterns. So with all of that feedback from our partners, getting guidance from the management board, we now have this proposed revised language. Next slide. Which does include a lot of text, but hopefully I can break it down for you to help you understand. So first off, we have to measure changing water quality conditions by maintaining core monitoring networks. So this speaks to the critical role of a strong tidal and non-tidal monitoring program and the analysis of the data in the overall outcome. Next, we have evaluating attainment of established water quality standards, which includes dissolved oxygen, clarity, and chlorophyll A in the bay. So this speaks to this the commitment to water quality standards, and it speaks more towards attaining it, which we did not have within our previous outcome language. We then have strengthening scientific understanding and communication of patterns in nitrogen, phosphorus, and sediment. So this speaks to the critical role of understanding factors influencing water quality and changes over time. We also have the comment of other parameters throughout the bay and watershed. And so this is speaking to the consideration of additional parameters for a more comprehensive assessment of the system's health, while not committing the program to tracking specific information. Also, by including the language of the bay and watershed, this speaks to the work being conducted watershed-wide and in the estuary. We then have 4 key targets that we are using to help track and assess the progress for this outcome. The first one being making sure that we maintain monitoring networks. So annually, we want to make sure we're maintaining the full core monitoring networks to make sure that we have operations to support analysis and communications of the loads, water quality standards attainment, and trends. Our next target is to develop methods for water quality standards attainment. Currently, within the Chesapeake Bay program, we are not able to assess all of our water quality standards criteria. So we are working with our partners to develop and expand approaches to support assessment of all dissolved oxygen, clarity, and chlorophyll A criteria in all designated uses, and we want to make sure that we use all available data. We did provide specific information for dissolved oxygen criteria assessment. This is that we will have methods approved by 2028. So again, that we can assess all criteria in all designated uses and apply that reporting by the end of 2030. The third target is focused on our evaluating water quality standards attainment. And again, making sure that we align with the work of the newly reducing excess nitrogen, phosphorus, and sediment outcome. We want to maintain a long-term trend of improvement in water quality standards attainment at a rate of at least 0.2% per year. And just to highlight that this aligns with the historical baseline of the trend that we use for a multi-metric water quality standards indicator, which helps us estimate our water quality standards. And then finally, we have a target for calculating water quality loads and trends. This speaks specifically to reducing nitrogen, phosphorus, and sediment with our trends, making sure that we have the monitoring available to do that, and assessing trends and communicating the results. We would do this on an annual timeline for the river input monitoring stations in the watershed, and then we would do this on a biannual timeline for our non-tidal network. And then for the tidal bay and estuaries, we would have an annual baseline for assessing trends and communicating the results. Those are the targets that we have focused on for this outcome. And so I would open it up to any questions you may have.
Breck, you did such a great job. I don't have any questions. So we will just wait about 30 seconds, see if anything pops up in our Q&A box. If not, then we have plenty to go back for both Keith and Jeremy. So. Okay. I would invite Keith and Jeremy, if you want to join us back in the webinar here. We can have a few more questions if you're willing to answer some more. And again, I encourage everybody to continue to add your questions to the Q&A box, and we will answer them as long as we have time. So Keith, going back to you.
Sure.
What will be measured as an outcome for toxics mitigation? How often will people meet? Or is this looking at more behavior change and mitigation actions?
Yeah, sure. And I think this question is kind of like, what will the new indicator look like? I think those discussions haven't happened yet, to be frank. I think some of it's going to kind of come down to how many resources do we, we're talking about money, right? How much time and money do we have to develop the indicator? What is kind of the interest of the work group in and what they want to measure their success against, right? We don't have numbers in our target, and so we need to be kind of creative about what that looks like moving forward. But it's a good question.
Okay, thanks. While I have you, I'm going to ask one more.
Yep.
For toxic contaminants, are we placing a number to the amount you all are wanting to reduce for each of those toxic contaminants you mentioned? Is there any amount of toxic contaminants located in the bay that you have numbers for already, and are you creating a plan from that?
Yeah, sure. So, this is kind of a tough question to answer, but in that, just because we say we, right? So I think part of the challenge, right, and I spoke with this a little bit before, is, the partnership is kind of not tackling some of these direct implementation, but the partners are going to, right? And so, if you go to there's another question about the Elizabeth River, about Baldwin Harbor, right? There are Superfund sites in both those areas. They have very, time, place, and partner acceptable risk characteristics for sort of determining what the goals are on those specific sites. And obviously, as a big program partnership, we represent generally different divisions of the same types of organizations and agencies that are thinking about those topics. The Bay Program Work Group at this point, the Toxic Contaminants Work Group, I would guess would probably not have, recommendations, for example, for how how the EPA and any state would manage their TSCA program or RCRA program or Superfund program. But I think that's going to kind of be determined as the work plan gets built out to reflect this updated outcome and target. It's probably the best way I can answer that question today.
Okay, thank you, Keith. Jeremy, has the amount of reduction needed by bay segment or land segment been calculated? I think that would be a good way to explain the need and set up priorities.
I think there has been some analysis of that. I'm not sure to what extent that's been communicated or shared. I just know that kind of information exists to do that based on the WIPs or scenarios that can be done within our CAST model online. I think that is possible to do. But yeah, I don't think we've done it in a large publicized way or anything, but I know it can be done.
Okay, thank you.
If I'm confident it can be done, I shouldn't say I know, because I'm not the person who would do it.
Understood. Jeremy, what can we do to help your efforts with the new model at the state or local level? This is being asked by someone who works for an MS4 Phase 2 in Virginia.
Yeah, I would say I would defer to the people from your state or maybe your planning district commission or other regional bodies you might work with, or people who are more involved with the Bay program, perhaps, because I think there are decisions that already have been made or in the works in the coming months to then do the work and get the model all together. So it's a pretty timely question, and I would say if you know people from your area or from your state that are heavily involved in the Bay program, I'd start with reaching out to them. And then beyond that, there will be a year of review once the model is stood up. It's looking like that's going to be 2027 when all that review of the model is going to happen. So that's another opportunity for folks to look at results or scenarios or things and see what's what. And I think there's other things that have already hit the streets that may be of interest. Like there was the big press release lately about the latest high resolution land use land cover data that isn't necessarily the same work product that will be in CAST, but they are related. So it's probably just good to find what you're interested in, get in touch with the people who are very plugged in, and go from there. Hope that helps. It's not a specific recommendation. Sorry.
Thanks, Jeremy. Keith, back to you. There used to be a focus on geographic toxic areas of concern, like the Elizabeth River or Baltimore Harbor. Was there any consideration of including anything related to them in this outcome? And if not, why?
Yeah, and including toxic areas of concern in the outcome language. So, I first of all, I may not be familiar with kind of some of that history, so I'll just kind of caveat my answer with that. I would think that would kind of be more appropriate to take place at the management plan or work plan level. So it might have not made the outcome or target language for that reason. In addition, right, kind of with this pivot away from what the current language is towards convening of practitioners, I think it would probably leave designated specific areas to other programs outside of the Bay program. So that's probably the best way to answer that question.
Thank you. And Jeremy, we'll come back to you. Are each of the currently approved WIPs being reviewed for level of participation or implementation?
Yeah, so when you say, not sure how to respond in terms of level of participation. We have the annual evaluations that we've had since the start of the TMDL. So certainly at a macro level, everything is getting evaluated by EPA out of this office. And I'm not sure, I can't speak to what DEQ themselves might be doing or reviewing at the state level as far as what the individual local governments may have provided to DEQ in terms of plans. But yeah, I think at a macro level, we're always tracking and reviewing implementation. I can't speak to participation.
Thank you. And while I have you, I'm going to ask you one more. Will there still be EPA reviews of 2-year milestones, and will they be made public?
Great question. So I need to brush up on our latest decision on that, honestly. So I'm gonna just punt a little bit because we at least committed to that we will have another 2-year milestone for what we're calling the near-term period. But we are, I think, trying to be a little innovative in terms of what that'll look like and how we use that as a communication tool partnership. So I know we scoped out some options and we got something approved up through the PSC, but off the top of my head, I know that will involve public release, of course, but to every aspect of that question, I'm not sure I can answer right now.
Thank you. Keith, curious, the outcome is reduce the amount and effects, but the target reflects no measure of reduction from or by what or how we measure effects. It seems like maybe the target could align further with the outcome language.
Yeah, so thanks for that question, Peter. I'll put my wordsmithing hat on to answer it. I think the idea, if you kind of look at that language, members of the management board really wanted to have, again, the intent of the work group towards reducing contaminants, which I think is important. The action part of the sentence is the second clause, which is around increasing capacity, right? And so under kind of how that sentence was structured, the outcome, the target really aligns with the action part of that sentence. That's what I would say.
Okay, thanks, Keith. Jeremy, are the reductions reported for nitrogen, phosphorus, and sediments achieved to date based on monitoring observations from cumulative actions within watersheds and measurable in watershed water quality or modeling estimates attributable to practices implemented for certain sectors? What will be the planned approach going forward, monitoring or modeling? Thank you. And actually, Breck, you might be able to weigh in on this as well.
Yeah, so I'll start by saying the numbers I said earlier, those percentages, those are based on the model. And those are straight off of Chesapeake Progress. So if you go to the current outcome and go to the Chesapeake Progress website for that, that's where I got those numbers, again, based on the model. I think in the latest release of that indicator, we already did start including and working in some more of the monitoring stuff to the extent it's available, because it's different time frames, time scales. So there's a little bit of apples and oranges inevitably involved with trying to compare things alongside of between the modeling and the monitoring, but we're already starting to do that. The partners have said that's something they want, and we're continuing to explore that as a partnership. And again, to this question and the last question, I should be clear, I'm not EPA employee, and I definitely don't speak for EPA.
Breck, anything to add? Good.
The last part of the question is what will be the planned approach for going forward? Again, with this new outcome for the reduced nitrogen, phosphorus, and sediment outcome, one of their targets is mentioning that we want multiple lines of evidence. So again, trying to make sure that we're incorporating the monitoring data that we have and that's available as much into the modeling, the model itself, but also evaluating the results based on what are we seeing in the observed data. So again, just trying to make sure in the future moving forward that we're aligning the work between what's happening with the implementation and the model with the observed data of the monitoring.
All right, thank you. And our last question is back to you, Keith. Any consideration for adding road salts specifically to the list of contaminants?
Interesting question. The topic didn't come up. I'm actually from upstate New York, north of the watershed, so I know road salt is a major issue, particularly at the local level, right kind of where the bridge is at times for brook trout and other cold water fisheries. So it's an interesting question. Maybe there'll be opportunities to partner with state departments of transportation, kind of similar to the way that the Fish Passage Work Group has in the Bay program. So maybe a potential for future focus. So thanks for that question.
There might be a stack workshop proposed on the issue of salinity, and so that's definitely something other partners have raised, and because it is of relevance to many of our outcomes. And I think I have also heard or seen research of how, for example, those road salts can also impact phosphorus.
Yeah.
And so it certainly impacts to many of our outcomes.
And I'll also add just quickly here at the end, we sort of intentionally use the phrase, I think, such as or including, but not limited to. We wanted to highlight a few of the most important toxic contaminants, but that's certainly not an exhaustive list. And those, of course, can be others as well. But thanks for all those questions.
So thank you, Peter Tango, for the additional comments in the Q&A.
And I'll just add that from Peter Tango, this is related to the previous question. He just wanted to give a shout out to the new metric indicator, which we really haven't communicated broadly yet, but it is coming, which will help to show measured changes in conjunction with the model-based changes to tell a more complete story of change together. So the best of both worlds. And I think that is a good way to end our webinar for today. And thank you all for the questions you asked. So just a reminder, we have 2 more webinars coming up. One next Thursday that'll cover the new proposed healthy landscapes goal. Those are the outcomes listed underneath there that it will be going over. And then on July 30th, we'll look at the engaged communities goal, and those are the outcomes listed there. So reminder, we will be posting this on our YouTube channel within the next 48 hours. And other than that, I'd like to thank you all for your participation today. And thank you to Jeremy, Breck, and Keith as well. Have a good day.